want us to think about that now. Fasting is clearly when you're restricting food or energy or calories. So when you're not eating food, and there are different types of fasts. Dry fast when you don't eat anything at all. Water fasting when you don't eat any food, but you can have some amount of water at some point during the period of the fast. Intermittent fasting when you are without food for certain hours of the day, and then for another designated period, then you're allowed to eat. So there are different types of fasting, but generally when you're fasting, what happens? So there are different things going on in the body. There's something called ketosis. Ketosis is a metabolic process. Because you've been starving the body of its usual glucose that you get from the food that you eat directly, the body then faces the fat that is stored and starts to burn that down instead. So that is one of the things that happens in ketosis. Another thing that happens during fasting is the body cleans out damaged cells, we think, by the process of fasting, so that it can generate new or healthier cells. So it's something called autophagy that the body is involved in. So, and the reason I'm bringing that in is because we're trying to look at the possible basis for fasting being of benefit in treating conditions like fibroids. So some scientists think that during fasting, this autophagy happens, which is the body clearing out damaged cells in order to create newer, healthier cells. So another thing that happens with fasting is that hormone balancing, hormone modulation. So it may be that during a fast, the body is able to repair an imbalance in some hormones during the fast. I didn't find specifically which ones might be affected, but there is some room to think that as the processes of ketosis are happening, as you're restricting yourself from eating certain types of foods, processed foods and all that, your body has the chance to balance some hormones. So that is one aspect that you may benefit from fasting. That's something that happens when you're fasting that you might benefit from. Of course, weight loss. Weight loss is a big one. So you would lose weight because, like we just said, you're burning fat, so you're going to lose weight. You might also find that inflammation is reduced. Inflammation, we know, or chronic inflammation in particular, is something that we feel is responsible for many types of disease conditions. We're talking about cancer, diabetes, high blood pressure. We know that there are certain things going on in the body, but we think that on a cellular level, there's also tissue inflammation that's contributing to those events that leads to chronic disease. So fasting could be something that reduces inflammation. And in the same way, it might also help to balance. We talked about trying to balance hormones. It may also contribute to reducing stress. So there are quite a few things that potentially fasting could provide benefits to. And I say this with a caution because fasting is not for everybody. Fasting needs to be supervised. If you dive into a fast and say, oh, I'm not going to eat anything for XY number of days, that is excessive, you're going to be sick, very ill. So it's not something to just dive without thinking and planning carefully, certainly without proper supervision. So, so those are some of the potential benefits of fasting. Some authorities believe it might help to reduce the risk of conditions like type 2 diabetes or heart conditions and so on. However, I also need to mention, because I found this reference in a study, that they looked at a meta-analysis. They put together a group of different studies and tried to see on average, what are these studies telling us about fasting and its effect on these conditions. And they said that particular big study suggested there was no impact of fasting, like intermittent fasting, on blood pressure and glucose levels. So this is something I want to really pull in your ear, because this is what we find in the medical community, that you may have a group of people that have a particular opinion and believe this is what we think. We've done our studies. This is what we think. X has this effect. On the other hand, another group of people in the same medical community will do their own research and say, no, actually, this doesn't have that effect. And so you have two different lines of thought, and you now have to wonder what's responsible for the difference, because which should we go with?